Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about climate. Zeke Housefather from Berkeley Earth is one of the primary go-to guys for climate propaganda. Whenever a journalist does a story covering my evidence of data tampering by NOAA and NASA, Zeke Housefather is the guy who PolitiFact and Snopes go to. Zeke tells them that NOAA and NASA had to do the data tampering, and then PolitiFact and Snopes mark the story as false, even though Zeke actually just told them that the story was true. And the one thing the journalists never do is actually talk to me, the person who created the claim in the first place. But Zeke is back generating propaganda for the American Physical Society. I'm going to read through one part of this article and then discuss it. Climate change, robust evidence of causes and impacts. Seaver Wang and Zeke Housefather. In the fall 2019 issue of the Forum on Physics and Society, Dr. Wallace Mannheimer penned a lengthy critique of what he saw as flaws in the scientific consensus on anthropogenic climate change. Considering the long history of climate change discourse, Earth scientists have now become acutely familiar with the most common approaches used to question the evidence for global warming, and indeed Mannheimer offers little intellectually new. Everything in this article is deflection, straw man arguments, hearsay, misinformation, and general propaganda. But in this video, I'm just going to focus on Claim 3. Claim 3, glaciers have been receding for 200 years, therefore predating industrial era emissions of CO2. The Jakobshavn Glacier in Greenland that everyone thought was receding is in fact growing, according to a recent study. Zeke's response. Mannheimer's claim that glaciers have been retreating for 200 years is unsighted, making it difficult to ascertain where it originates from. Very few glaciers worldwide have been accurately monitored for at least 2 centuries. Mannheimer may be referring to a recent study by Dickens et al., which used oxygen isotope data as a proxy for glacial discharge to identify an increasing trend in Antarctic ice shelf thinning over the past 300 years. If anything, however, a longer-term trend of glacier retreat represents a cause for more worry, not less, as such glaciers may have already been predisposed to retreat prior to the onset of human-induced warming, suggesting that climate change could significantly accelerate this pre-existing trend. Indeed, the World Glacier Monitoring Service has reported demonstrable recent acceleration in the rate of ice mass loss for the overwhelming majority of monitored glaciers in recent decades. Mannheimer fails to mention that the Jakobshavn Glacier study's authors believe that its recent growth is only temporary and attributed to natural cyclical variability in regional temperatures. Prior to the shift to recent ice mass accumulation, the Jakobshavn had retreated at an accelerating rate for 2 decades, single-handedly contributing to an estimated 0.9 millimeters of global mean sea level rise between 2000 and 2010. So Zeke's argument boils down to that we don't actually know what glaciers were doing in the past, but they're retreating much more rapidly now. Had Zeke gone to the National Park Service website, he could have found out that we know a lot about the history of glaciers. They show that Alaska's largest glacier, Glacier Bay, advanced significantly between 1680 and 1750. And then the glacier retreated 45 miles between 1750 and 1880, during a time when carbon dioxide in the atmosphere hardly changed at all. And then the retreat over the last 140 years since 1880 was much less than the retreat during the 130 years prior to 1880. This map from the U.S. Geological Survey shows that there's been essentially no retreat in the West Arm since 1912. But it retreated more than 50 miles from 1760 to 1912. The retreat of Alaska's largest glacier has slowed tremendously, not accelerated as Zeke claims. And there is zero correlation with carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, quite the opposite. Or Zeke could have gone to the United States Geologic Survey and learned the history of glaciers in Glacier National Park. He would have learned that glaciers in Glacier National Park have been retreating since 1850, and that they may not even have existed during the medieval warm period. In 1923, experts predicted that the Sperry Glacier in Glacier National Park would be gone in 25 years. That would have been 1948. In 1936, the United States Geologic Survey predicted that Glacier National Park would be ice-free by the year 1961. But CNN reports that Glacier National Park just took down their signs predicting an ice-free park by the year 2020. Obviously, the glaciers are not melting as fast as they were in 1923 or 1936, because if they were, they would have been gone a long time ago. And if Zeke would have gone to the NASA website, he would have found out that the Jakobshavn Glacier in Greenland retreated very rapidly from 1851 until 1964, and then hardly at all from 1964 till 2001. And over the last 3 years, that glacier has been growing again for the first time since the Little Ice Age. But Zeke claims that the ice loss is accelerating there, which obviously isn't true. And if Zeke's not familiar with the NASA website, he could have gotten the same information from the Geologic Survey of Denmark. NASA reports that the glacier's been growing for 3 consecutive years since 2016. Now let's look at what experts were saying about the Jacobshavn Glacier in the year 2016. Washington Post, one of the world's fastest melting glaciers, may have just lost its biggest chunk of ice on record. Jason Box, a glaciologist with the Geologic Survey of Denmark and Greenland, says he wouldn't rule out the possibility that the calving event is the largest to occur. And Eric Rigneau, a principal scientist and ice expert at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, says that whether or not the event is the largest on record, he's struck by the sheer size of this calving event, which he says is evidence that the glacier is continuing to retreat at a galloping speed. So in 2016, experts said the glacier was retreating at galloping speed, yet the glacier was actually advancing. As is normally the case, these experts had no clue what they were talking about. And these are the same people whom Zeke was citing as his expert sources. People have known for well over a century that glaciers have been rapidly disappearing. They were rapidly retreating in 1902. They were rapidly retreating in 1903. 1903, glaciers disappear. The ice in Greenland is melting more rapidly than it's formed. Comparison of the descriptions of the Jacobshavn Glacier shows that its edge has retreated 8 miles since 1850, and it's lost 20 to 30 feet in depth. It takes me about 30 seconds to find these things. So why is it that our top climate experts like Zeke claim to be unaware of them? By 1906, the Ross ice shelf around Antarctica had retreated some 30 miles. According to NASA, 1906 was one of the coldest years on record. In 1907, it was reported that the glaciers of Switzerland were experiencing remarkable shrinkage. In 1910, glaciers were retreating all over the world. The same story in 1917. By 1922, the Ross ice shelf around Antarctica had retreated some 40 miles. By 1939, the glaciers of Greenland and Norway were melting very rapidly and facing the possibility of a catastrophic collapse. Temperatures in the eastern Arctic were warming 1 degree every 2 years, and since 1910, winter temperatures had increased by nearly 16 degrees. Having failed at their previous predictions, in 1940 experts predicted that Glacier National Park would be ice-free by the year 2000. In 1940 it was predicted that one of Mount Rainier's most famous glaciers would be gone in a few years. In 1947, experts said that the Arctic had warmed 10 degrees Fahrenheit since 1900, an enormous rise from the scientific standpoint, and that people living along seashores were going to be inundated with meltwater. And in 1952 it was reported that the glaciers of Norway and Alaska had lost half their size during the first half of the 20th century. Zeke's claims are based on an ignorance of history, and hearsay from people who've shown that they don't even understand what's going on in the Arctic now, much less in the future. And working at Berkeley Earth, Zeke is largely responsible for the wildly exaggerated hockey stick in the global temperature record. He advertises himself as a left-wing activist and is hardly an impartial observer. Over and over again, climate experts have shown themselves to be completely unreliable, yet they appear to be trying to influence public policy. For the good of mankind, we need to make sure that this doesn't happen. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science and propaganda for a long time.